Welcome to When We Die Talks. I'm your host, Zach Ansell. In this podcast, we explore different beliefs about what happens when we die and how those ideas shape the way we live. Thanks for tuning in. I'm glad you're here. This episode is brought to you by The Dead Book. Okay, let's get real for a second. How prepared are your parents, your siblings, your partner, or even you for the future? We're not talking about the fun stuff, but the hard stuff, end-of-life planning. It's a tough conversation, but that's why The Dead Book exists. The Dead Book makes it easy to plan ahead, even if you think you don't have the time, money, or assets. It's affordable, straightforward, and designed to give you and your loved ones peace of mind. They've made it their mission to help others avoid the chaos and stress that comes with being unprepared. Visit thedeadbook.co and get started today. And just for listening, use the code WWDT at checkout for 15% off. Hey everyone, first off, I just want to wish all who celebrate a happy Thanksgiving. I hope you're able to take a moment to reflect on what matters most this holiday season. Today's episode is a little different. Instead of an interview, I'm sharing a collection of voicemails from all of you. Some of these may sound familiar if you've been with me from the start, but I wanted to breathe new life into them. Social media can make it hard to fully appreciate long-form audio, so I'm excited to present these messages in a new format. And of course, there's a few brand new voicemails mixed in as well. I'd love your feedback on this and what you think about this episode. I'm still figuring out the best way to share these voicemails, and I'm excited about the new direction it's taking, but I want to make sure it's working for all of you. Check the show notes for all the ways you can get in touch. I'd love to hear what you think. Also, huge thank you to everyone who's already called in and shared their beliefs. It's been such an important part of the podcast and the project as a whole. The voicemail is the heart of When We Die Talks, and I hope many of you continue to join the conversation. Finally, with the holidays coming up, I'm shifting the schedule so that the next interview will be released next Wednesday. This way we can get 2 more When We Die Wednesdays before the end of the year. My next guest will be my friend Derek Green, and we'll be discussing his life experience with Huntington's disease. It's an important conversation that I can't wait for you to hear. And now, let's dive into the voicemails. I hope you enjoy.
I think this world, this life that we're living now is actually the worst of all of it. I think we lived even before this life. Then we traverse this life, die to go into the next. And the next is better than this. I expect we'll see our loved ones there and progress, I guess. Never dying till forever and ever.
Hi, thanks for including me in this project. I find it interesting and also probably somewhat therapeutic. I almost did die about 2 years ago when giving birth to my 3rd child. I spontaneously started to hemorrhage after a pretty difficult delivery, and everything was sort of in slow motion for me. I at first was really scared, and obviously there was a lot of blood loss, but I was fully conscious and aware that everyone was trying to help. And as I continued to lose blood, I remember them talking about giving me a blood transfusion and them having to do that quickly. I already had IVs in my arms, so they shoved one in my ankle to give me the blood, and it was right about the time that I started to transition, I think. And the best way I can describe it is I went from this place of intense fear. I had just given birth to my child, my husband, standing in front of the bed that I'm laying on, holding a crying baby, to a full sense of peace. And there was no, rhyme or reason or explanation other than I think I had lost so much blood and my blood pressure was starting to drop that I think is what the human brain does when you are dying. And in reflection, it's actually incredibly comforting to know that the human brain has the mechanism, and that's my belief, that it can be proven by science, that the human brain, when deprived of oxygen or blood flow, puts you into a state of relaxation and peace and acceptance. And that's where I was for a very brief point in time until my blood pressure came back up and quickly went back into that state of fear and shock. But I think in some instances, before you transition from the living world to dying, your body puts you at ease and at peace. And I hope that that's the experience for others. It was comforting for me, and now moving forward, thankfully I'm still here and healthy, and so is my child. I know that experience was real, and just gave me a great sense of peace that perhaps the end of life is not always traumatic and scary. Thanks for letting me share.
Hi, I'm not sure. I don't anticipate that you will use this for this project just because I do tend to ramble, so I apologize in advance. I work as a hospice caretaker, and I am constantly surrounded by death, and the experiences that people have are always very different, but there's also a lot of common traits that people experience. I think the thing that took me back the most was the amount of religious people who lived out their lives with the belief that they were going to go to heaven, or that they were going to live in eternity with God, and that they would just simply leave this world behind and look over us from above. And when it comes down to it, the amount of people whose faith actually dwindles towards the end time. I've seen Catholic priests call in Buddhist priests and Jewish leaders and just pinpoint. They wanted to make sure wherever was truly the right heaven, that they were going to be accepted into that place, regardless of the fact that they had practiced their belief for their entire life and preached it their entire life. They become unsure, and they became scared. Like, what if everything that we believed was a lie? What if it's not even real? And I lived my entire life dedicated to this ideology, this belief. So recently, my dad just passed away in November, and he has been a pastor at a Christian church for my entire life, and all he ever did was preach and talk about the gospel and everything. And of course, growing up in the church, you know what you're supposed, how death is supposed to work. It's been infused in you since we were tiny kids. And I flew down to take care of him because that's what I do for the last 5 days of his life. And he didn't know he was going to die. He had cancer, and he believed that God was going to create a miracle and it was going to save him. My dad was fully conscious up until the day he passed. He was very aware of everything. He was in denial that it was really happening, but he knew that I knew. And at one point, I took his hand and I said, "Dad, are you scared?" And he looked at me and he said, "No, baby, not even a little bit." I said, "Okay, like, good." But I could see that he was actually scared. He knew what was happening. He took my hand and said, "I feel a shift today." And I said, "That's okay." But to everybody else, he would say, "We're still believing in this miracle that was going to happen." But the people who he understood knew what was happening. He would tell them, like, it's going to be soon. And when you lose somebody and you've been programmed to believe that they're always going to be there, even after death, it's hard to sit here and, like, physically hold his ashes and just kind of be like, is he there? Like, was his fight and point that he was trying to make, was it for nothing? Or, like, I think when you work around death all the time, the idea that we live forever in eternity after this, that our spirit lives on, is kind of hard to believe when you're just seeing somebody's lifeless body, you know. But in this industry, I've also come to realize that death is a beautiful thing. It brings people together, and it helps us ask questions that maybe when they were here, we didn't want to ask, to get to know them. When you go to a funeral, you get to know these people on levels that you didn't know them before. But this was like the most depressing call you probably ever got. I apologize. But thanks for letting me call.
I'd put off calling a little bit because I was trying to get my thoughts in order, but I really find myself thinking about my mom a lot. She passed at the beginning of the year, and Christmas was the last time we were all together before she passed. It was the last time I saw her. And she was such a big personality that I like to think a part of that personality is carried on somewhere. You know, human beings are mostly composed of energy. The essence of the soul and the mind and our thoughts and our personality, you can argue, are electrical impulses coursing through our body and our brain. And it's hard for me to believe that that just goes away. I like to think that maybe we leave some portion of ourselves on the energy of the universe around us. Maybe that's what ghosts are. Maybe that's what the soul is, just the imprinted memories of the electrical currents on the atmosphere and the universe around us. It's easy to think about what happens to your molecular body. Like, we all come from stardust, and the stardust will return, but the essence of you, that's the part that I'm having a hard time reconciling. What happens to the you? Is it just gone? I really like to think that the same way that matter is recycled into the universe somehow, that energy is recycled into the universe somehow. That somewhere that wild mass of energy that was my mother has also been recycled and has gone out and is seeding other things within the universe. And I hope that's what will eventually happen to me too. I think about my mortality a lot more these days, having gotten a little bit older. None of us really know, huh?
The question of what happens when we die has been a tough one to grasp and articulate. Death in my personal life has been so far removed. The books I've read, the talks I've heard, and even loved ones who I experienced the pain and sorrow with. In many ways, I needed a collision to happen, and I've waited for death to come near. The elusive and unexpected happened on Thursday. His name was Johnny Gaudreau. Unless you're an avid hockey fan, this name would just be a name. A headline in the sports section turned into one of those news love stories. You know, you gain notoriety when TMZ, People Magazine, and New York Post have written all about you. The story that is unexpected and incomprehensible. On Thursday night, Johnny and his brother were riding on bikes on a two-lane road, where you need to hug the line and hope the car will give you some space. This was the night before his sister's wedding. A drunk driver was impatient with the speed of the cars ahead of him, and he needed to pass. In his mind, the driver that pulled out into the median was being an asshole and penning his pass, when in actuality, the car was moving over for two bikers. But this drunk driver didn't know that and swerved to pass on the right, instantly killing them both. After reading these, I had this intense feeling that were really hard to grasp a story like this. For the best ways to comprehend and piece myself back is to go on a walk, to write my thoughts down, and to sit under a tree. A being, just like death, who won't be able to answer, but can give me solace to be grounded, held, and heard. There are times I will add into the conversation acknowledgement of 12 loved ones who've made an impact on me to think about death. And as I sat under this tree, it was when I said the name Jacob Dean Brock, where the flood of emotions became less intense. A little over 18 years ago, he was also killed by a drunk driver. He and his girlfriend were hit violently from behind, getting off the exit to go to the movies. The circumstances and timing of this impact has always made me ask the question, what if? What if Jake and his girlfriend would have left 5 minutes later? What if the drunk driver wouldn't have sped away when the cops pulled him over? My instinct is to want to dive deep in the changes on how I would want to answer this question about death after 18 years, where my thoughts are, how they transformed and evolved over time. But for now, I'll keep it short and sweet. I believe when we die, we cease to exist. Poof. In the beautiful, empty darkness, what remains is the impact that we made on each other's lives. Like a crash, however big it is, our loved ones remain to pick up the energy and passion that you put out there. And now it's their chance to remind themselves where we go when we die.
Hello. I wish I could prepare a little bit more before this call. I was thinking about giving a call for quite a bit, but then I decided to do it spontaneously. Yesterday, me and my partner, we did have a talk about death, and we shared a very intimate moment and cried a lot and hugged each other and our cats because we understand that it's not forever. And especially, I'm from Ukraine and there's a war. Russia started a war against us, and we thinking about coming back to my country because this is the right thing to do. My partner is American, and he might be joining the Legion, International Legion. So he's been mentally preparing himself and thinking about he might not come back from it and how we cherish what we have right now. And he did share with me his experience when he took DMT once, a very high dose of DMT, and he thought that he experienced pretty much what happens after we die. And it's really hard to explain for him, but it was just everything at once, and he didn't exist, and it was just like a field of energy. I've never taken any of those drugs, and I personally never experienced anything like near-death experience, but I've been thinking about death since childhood. And I felt like I was kind of stuck in between two worlds when I was a very young child. My mom used to, back in the post-Soviet Union, it was a very common thing to do. A lot of people were going to psychics. There was no religion in the Soviet Union, but I guess people kind of acquired some sense of they were looking for something. They were looking for some more like of a spiritual guidance. And she was bringing me to the psychic when I was about 2-3 years old, and the psychic was telling her that I am stuck between two worlds. And I kind of can relate to that because I was not really fully present in reality, and a lot of times I was just like nowhere and really stuck and not really understanding that I am alive, I guess. I saw a lot of visuals as a child that had very, very rich fantasy. And when I was 5, I think I wrote on a piece of paper that death, like coming home paper, and she got terrified. And now I told her as a child that I'm not terrified of death, and she was very upset that I'm thinking and talking about death as a young child. But for me, it was like a very natural thing, and I just did it very intuitively. And there was a moment when my aunt's fiance got killed. It was the mafia in our town, and he was killed when after returning home, when he followed her home and make sure she's okay, and then he got mugged and killed by a mafia in our city. And that was the first person ever that I knew that was killed, that died, and I was about 3.5 at that time. And I didn't really know what it is, what death is, but I kind of felt it, and I felt very comfortable about it, and I felt very calm about it. And I saw my whole family crying and in black clothes, and as a child, I was just very confused. And I remember that I did tell them that he returned back to his mom, which as a child I never knew that he lost his mom too. So very intuitively, it kind of always followed me along, and I always felt about it very calmly, and it's like a place that has always exists with us. And it's not like it's invisible, but it is present. It's much more present than we all think, and it's going to happen to all of us. So something that is very humbling about it. Doesn't really care about your status and your money and your looks and your reputation. It's just gonna happen to all of us. And in this sense, I actually really respect death. And I just want to take, whenever I'm gonna die, I just wanted to take it with grace and with appreciation to all things alive. And I think I just wanted to do something very important before it happens. Something that I think is right, and something is not that measured in materialistic values. Something that measure for me is in more like of a idealistic measures, I'd say. So that's why I'm going back home to Ukraine, and I feel like that's going to be a journey, and I want to die on my land and my soil in the place that I was born. So my odyssey. All right. Thank you so much.
Hi. So I'm not really good at these types of things. And I guess by these types of things, I just mean talking on a whim about deep feelings and stuff. I do know that the longer I'm alive and the longer I continue to make mistakes or don't necessarily move forward in life, or let my own anxieties hold me back, the more I fear of what happens after we die. Because I don't want this life to feel like it was wasted. And while I'm not really sure if what I'm saying pertains to what happens after we die, I wanted to take a minute to at least try and tell anyone that if they are struggling with something, or if they just feel like they're living in some type of empty void, to keep pushing forward. And I know that's easier said than done, but even if it's just a blanket of nothing after we die, I don't want to leave this earth, and I don't want anyone else to ever leave knowing that you could have done more, or, you know, that you basically just lived to be an anxious little shit the entire time. I know this is probably not all that insightful, but that's just kind of my take on it, that if you are fearing death or what happens afterwards, try and stay present in the moment, in that you matter. And I love you. And yeah, that's it. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of When We Die Talks. I hope today's conversation sparked some thoughts and helped you feel a little more at ease with the idea of death. Remember, this journey is all about exploring our beliefs and fears together, so I'd love to hear from you. Call our voicemail at 971-328-0864 and share what you think happens when we die. Your thoughts might just be featured on a future episode and could help others on their own journey. Until next time, have a good life.